We're just dating. Stop acting like my husband. I'd been with Mia for 18 months, thinking we were building something real together in our shared downtown Denver apartment. I owned a custom motorcycle repair shop that I'd built from nothing, working 12-hour days to establish a reputation among the Harley and vintage bike community. The business was finally turning a solid profit, and I thought Mia and I were moving toward the same goals. Maybe engagement, definitely a future that meant something more than casual dating. I came home early that Tuesday afternoon, planning to surprise her with dinner reservations at that Italian place she'd mentioned wanting to try. Instead, I found her at the coffee shop downstairs from our building, leaning across a small table toward some guy I'd never seen before. She was laughing in that particular way she did when she wanted to be charming, touching his arm while they exchanged phone numbers. I watched through the window for a full minute, feeling something cold settle in my stomach as she saved his contact information with obvious enthusiasm. When I walked in, she barely looked embarrassed. The guy made some excuse about needing to leave, but not before she assured him they'd definitely text later. I waited until we were back upstairs before asking who he was. She rolled her eyes like I was being unreasonable and explained that his name was Marcus. He worked in marketing for some tech company, and they just hit it off while she was grabbing her usual afternoon latte. When I pointed out that hitting it off typically didn't involve exchanging numbers while your boyfriend was at work, she got defensive immediately. That's when she delivered the line that changed everything. She told me we were just dating, and I needed to stop acting like her husband. She said she needed space to explore connections with other people since we weren't engaged or married. She wanted the freedom to meet new people, go on casual dates, see what else was out there. She made it sound like I was being possessive and controlling for expecting basic relationship boundaries. According to her logic, without a ring on her finger, she owed me nothing in terms of exclusivity or commitment. I stood there in our kitchen, looking at the woman I'd been planning to propose to within the next 6 months, listening to her explain why she deserved the right to date other men while living in our shared apartment and splitting expenses with me. She wanted all the benefits of our established relationship: shared rent, shared utilities, shared groceries, someone to come home to every night, while maintaining complete freedom to pursue whatever opportunities came along. She genuinely believed this was reasonable. I realized in that moment that I'd been completely wrong about what we meant to each other. While I'd been seeing our relationship as the foundation for something permanent, she'd been treating it like a comfortable arrangement that shouldn't interfere with her options. She wanted me to be her reliable backup plan while she shopped around for something better. The 18 months I'd invested in us meant nothing compared to her desire to keep her possibilities open. Instead of arguing or trying to convince her otherwise, I told her she was absolutely right. We weren't married, we were just dating. And since she wanted the freedom to explore other connections, she should absolutely have that freedom. She looked surprised, maybe even relieved, like she'd expected a much bigger fight. I think she assumed I'd accept her terms and just deal with the new arrangement she'd unilaterally decided on. That night, while she went out for drinks with her yoga instructor friends, probably including Marcus, I started making plans. If we were just casually dating according to her definition, then I needed to start acting like someone who was just casually dating. That meant a lot of things were about to change, starting with my living situation. I spent the next week methodically planning my exit, while Mia continued her new routine of casual dating freedom. She'd come home late talking about drinks with new friends, coffee dates with interesting people she'd met, always emphasizing how refreshing it was to have space to be herself. She seemed genuinely happy with the arrangement, which made my decision easier. I called my friend Leo, who worked in real estate, and asked him to help me find a place across town. Within 3 days, he'd located a decent one-bedroom apartment near my shop that I could afford easily on my own income. Moving out required careful coordination, since Mia worked irregular hours at the yoga studio, and I didn't want a confrontation until everything was final. I started with small items, tools from my home workshop, books, personal electronics, boxing them up during her shifts and storing them at the shop. Leo helped me rent a storage unit for furniture and larger items. We worked methodically, taking only what was clearly mine and leaving anything we'd bought together. The process took nearly 2 weeks, but Mia was so focused on her new social life that she didn't notice the gradual emptying of our shared space. Our third roommate, Zoe, a night shift nurse who kept different hours than both of us, started noticing the boxes and missing items. She pulled me aside one evening while Mia was at what she called a networking event, which I assumed meant another date. Zoe warned me that Mia had been complaining to her about feeling tied down in our relationship, but had also mentioned multiple times that she couldn't afford the upscale downtown apartment without my contribution to rent and utilities. According to Zoe, Mia seemed to think she could maintain her freedom while keeping our financial arrangement intact indefinitely. I realized Mia hadn't thought through the practical implications of casual dating someone she lived with and split major expenses with. She wanted relationship freedom, but assumed I'd continue providing relationship stability in terms of housing and financial support. The rent alone was $2,800 a month, plus utilities, parking, and building fees that brought the total close to $3,500. Mia's yoga instructor income was maybe $1,800 on a good month. She'd need a completely different living situation or a significant roommate contribution to maintain her current lifestyle. I decided not to give her advanced warning about my plans. She'd made a unilateral decision to change our relationship terms without consulting me. So I felt justified in making my own unilateral decision about how to respond. I arranged for movers to collect my remaining furniture and belongings on a day when she'd be teaching back-to-back classes at the studio. Leo helped coordinate everything, ensuring I could complete the move in a single afternoon while she was gone. The night before my final move, I sat in what had been our shared living room, looking at the space we'd furnished together over 18 months. I felt sad about the end of what I'd thought was something meaningful, but not regretful about my decision. Mia had shown me exactly where I stood in her priorities, and I was simply responding accordingly. If she wanted casual dating, then she could have casual dating with all the independence and self-reliance that went along with it. I wrote a simple note explaining my position and left it on the kitchen counter, where she'd definitely see it when she came home. The note was brief and factual, acknowledging that she'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for. I mentioned that rent was due on the 1st, since casual dating partners typically didn't cover each other's major expenses. Then I left my key beside the note and drove to my new apartment, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Mia returned home around 10 that evening to find the apartment mostly empty of my belongings. According to Leo, who heard the story from Zoe later, she initially thought we'd been robbed. She walked through the rooms calling my name, probably expecting to find me tied up somewhere, or at least some sign of forced entry. It took several minutes for her to notice the note on the kitchen counter written on the back of an envelope in my handwriting. The message was simple and direct. Perfect. Now you can date whoever you want. Since we're just dating and I was acting too much like a husband, I figured you'd prefer the freedom. Rent's due on the 1st, Jake. Her reaction was immediate and intense. She called my phone 17 times in the first hour, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that progressed from confusion to anger to something approaching panic. I listened to the first few messages where she demanded to know what I thought I was doing and insisted I come back immediately to discuss things like adults. By message 10, she was crying and asking how I could just abandon our relationship without warning. By message 15, she was threatening to throw away anything I'd left behind and change the locks to keep me out permanently. I didn't respond to any of the calls or messages. Instead, I spent the evening unpacking in my new place, setting up my workshop area, and enjoying the quiet that came with living alone. When she finally reached me the next morning, I stayed with the same calm tone I'd used when she first told me she wanted space to explore connections. I explained that I was simply giving her exactly what she asked for, complete freedom to date other people without worrying about a boyfriend who acted too much like a husband. She bounced between fury and desperation during that conversation, insisting I was being ridiculous and vindictive. She said I was overreacting to what she called a simple request for more independence in our relationship. When I pointed out that moving out seemed like the most logical way to give her the independence she wanted, She became even more agitated. She demanded to know where I was living and whether I planned to help with rent until she could find a replacement roommate. I told her that casual dating partners typically handled their own housing arrangements independently. Leo witnessed most of Mia's meltdown from his side, since he was both my friend and the person she desperately called trying to learn where I was. He told me later it was obvious she had never thought I'd actually leave. She assumed I would just accept her new terms while still maintaining all the practical benefits of our shared living situation. In her mind, she could have dating freedom while keeping the financial security and domestic stability of someone who was basically her live-in boyfriend in everything but name. Zoe confirmed Leo's take when she described Mia's behavior in the days after. Mia kept asking when I planned to come back and whether this was some kind of elaborate attempt to make her jealous. She seemed genuinely shocked that I responded to her request for casual dating by treating the relationship exactly as casual. Apparently, she expected negotiation or compromise, some open relationship hybrid where I provided stability while she explored other options. Reality hit when the first bills arrived. Without my contribution, the apartment's monthly expenses exceeded her entire income by nearly $2,000. She'd been so focused on gaining relationship freedom that she didn't consider the financial consequences of losing the partner who covered nearly 60% of our shared living costs. Her casual dating freedom had a price tag she couldn't afford, and she was starting to realize her choices had consequences she didn't expect when she first demanded independence. Over the next few weeks, Mia bombarded me with requests that showed just how much she'd relied on having a committed partner without ever really acknowledging it. Her car started making grinding noises, and she called asking if I could take a look at it, since I'd always handled her automotive issues before. When I suggested she take it to a regular mechanic, she complained about the expense and reminded me that I used to fix these things for free. I pointed out that casual dating partners usually paid for professional services rather than expecting free labor from someone they were seeing non-exclusively. She needed help moving furniture to make room for a potential roommate, help co-signing a new lease because her credit wasn't strong enough alone, and advice about negotiating with her landlord for a payment plan on overdue rent. Each request came packaged as a reasonable favor between people who cared about each other. But I responded to every crisis with polite suggestions about handling things independently. When she accused me of being cold and abandoning someone who needed help, I reminded her that we were just casually dating according to her definition, and casual dating partners don't typically act as emergency contacts or financial guarantors. The most revealing moment happened when she locked herself out of the apartment at midnight after a date with Marcus. She called me crying, explaining Zoe was working a double shift and she had no way to get inside. She expected me to drive across town with my spare key, the way I used to when we were in a committed relationship. Instead, I suggested she call a locksmith or get a hotel for the night, because those were the options available to someone who was casually dating. She spent the next hour on the phone accusing me of being vindictive and heartless for not rescuing her from a situation she could resolve on her own. Her attempts to guilt me for abandoning our connection were met with consistent reminders of the boundaries she had chosen. When she complained about feeling alone and unsupported during stressful times, I acknowledged that casual dating could feel less secure than a committed relationship, presumably why she wanted it in the first place. She grew more frustrated every time I refused to provide boyfriend-level support while she enjoyed girlfriend-level independence. The breaking point came when she asked me to co-sign a loan for a cheaper car after her BMW lease became unaffordable. She presented it as a reasonable request between people with an established history, emphasizing she'd always been reliable about payments when we were together. I explained that co-signing loans was exactly the type of long-term financial entanglement casual dating partners avoided, because it created obligations between people who weren't committed. Her reaction showed how completely she misunderstood the implications of her request for relationship freedom. She accused me of punishing her for being honest about her needs, and said I was deliberately making her life difficult out of spite. I told her I was simply honoring the boundaries she herself set, treating our connection as the casual dating situation she defined. The conversation grew more heated, as she realized casual dating meant losing access to the practical support and financial cooperation that came with committed partnerships. She wanted relationship benefits without relationship obligations, but real life doesn't work on a la carte terms. By the end of the month, she was scrambling to solve problems she never had to manage alone in the 18 months we were together. Her requests became more desperate and her accusations more bitter as she faced the reality of supporting herself completely while trying to maintain the lifestyle she'd gotten used to with my help. She was learning the hard way that freedom and security usually sit on opposite ends of the same spectrum. You choose one and give up the other. My friendship with Zoe started developing naturally during this time. Beginning the day, she asked for help moving some medical equipment from her car after a rough shift at the hospital. Unlike my interactions with Mia, helping Zoe felt balanced and reciprocal. She insisted on buying dinner afterward, and our conversation revealed shared values about financial responsibility, genuine commitment, and building something meaningful. She'd watched the collapse of my relationship with Mia through the eyes of someone who worked in healthcare, someone who understood the importance of reliability and follow-through. Over the next weeks, Zoe and I spent more time together. First, just as friends, navigating the awkwardness of sharing an apartment building with my increasingly desperate ex. Zoe had savings from her nursing job and planned to buy a small house within a year, something that impressed me after dealing with someone who couldn't budget for basic expenses. Our conversations about her house hunt and my plans to expand my shop felt refreshingly practical and forward-thinking compared to the drama of Mia's financial mess and dating adventures. The relationship grew slowly from friendship into something deeper as we discovered how well our goals and personalities aligned. Zoe appreciated my work ethic and planning, and I admired her dedication and patience. When we started officially dating, it felt like a partnership between equals, not the balanced dynamic I'd lived with before. We split expenses proportionally based on income, made decisions together, and supported each other's ambitions without trying to control or depend on one another. Working together on Zoe's house purchase became a bonding experience, showing me everything I'd been missing. She researched neighborhoods, calculated mortgage payments, and saved a real down payment through disciplined budgeting. When she asked for my opinion on properties, it was because she valued my perspective, not because she needed someone to handle it for her. The whole process felt collaborative and exciting instead of one-sided and draining. When Mia found out about our relationship through social media posts about our weekend house hunting trips, her reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused me of having an emotional affair during our relationship and claimed that my connection with Zoe proved I'd never been committed to making things work with her. I pointed out that casual dating partners don't typically claim exclusivity or express jealousy about their ex's new relationships, especially when those relationships developed months after the original breakup. Her response revealed the fundamental contradiction in her thinking about what she'd wanted from our arrangement. She insisted that I should have fought harder for our relationship instead of giving up so easily when she'd asked for space and independence. According to her logic, my willingness to honor her request for casual dating proved that I hadn't really loved her, because someone who truly cared would have refused to accept those terms. I realized she'd wanted me to reject her conditions and convince her to maintain our committed relationship, essentially making the decision for her so she wouldn't have to choose between freedom and security herself. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was now demanding exactly the kind of possessive, husband-like behavior she'd originally criticized me for. She wanted retroactive commitment and jealousy about a relationship that she'd explicitly defined as casual and non-exclusive. Her accusations about emotional affairs rang particularly hollow, since she'd been the one exchanging numbers with strangers and going on dates with other people while we were still living together. She couldn't have it both ways, treating our connection as casual when it suited her while expecting committed relationship loyalty when it didn't. Unable to afford the apartment alone, Mia tried desperately to find a replacement roommate who would accept her increasingly specific and unreasonable demands. She needed someone who would cover the larger bedroom rent while letting her keep the master suite, wouldn't interfere with her dating life or judge her for bringing different men home, and would be flexible about her irregular yoga instructor income affecting rent payments. According to Zoe, who fielded several inquiries from potential roommates, Mia's requirements drove away every serious candidate who could actually afford their share of the expenses. The few people who showed interest were either equally unreliable financially or had red flags that should have been obvious warning signs. After 3 weeks of unsuccessful searches and mounting late fees, Mia settled on a guy named Derek who seemed charming and claimed to work in cryptocurrency trading. He paid the first month up front in cash and moved in immediately, which should have raised questions about someone who had that much liquid money but needed to find housing through desperate roommate ads. Within 2 weeks, Derek's true situation became apparent when angry creditors started showing up at the apartment looking for him. He'd apparently been evicted from his previous place for property damage and unpaid rent, and had used fake references to secure the room with Mia. Worse, he'd been using their address to redirect mail and packages for what appeared to be various financial schemes involving cryptocurrency scams and identity theft. When Zoe mentioned strange packages and official-looking notices piling up, Mia realized she'd inadvertently become involved in potentially illegal activities. Derek disappeared one morning without warning, taking several valuable items from the apartment, including Mia's laptop and expensive jewelry piece she'd inherited from her grandmother. He also left behind evidence of his activities that made Mia paranoid about potential legal consequences for harboring someone involved in financial fraud. The police report she filed revealed that Derek had multiple warrants and had been using different names in similar roommate scams across the city. Meanwhile, Zoe and I successfully closed on a small house in a quiet neighborhood near my motorcycle shop, splitting the down payment and mortgage responsibilities based on our respective incomes and savings. The entire process had taken 4 months of careful planning and financial preparation, representing the kind of long-term thinking and cooperative decision-making that makes relationships work. Moving in together felt like a natural progression rather than a desperate arrangement to cover expenses neither of us could handle alone. Mia's mutual friends began understanding the real dynamic of our previous relationship as they witnessed the contrast between her current chaos and the stability Zoe and I were building together. Leo mentioned that several people who'd initially criticized me for abandoning Mia were starting to realize that I'd simply responded appropriately to someone who'd taken my support for granted while actively seeking alternatives. Her social media posts about toxic men and learning to value herself weren't gaining the sympathy she'd expected from people who'd watched her create her own problems. The final blow came when the apartment management company held Mia responsible for Derek's unpaid utilities and the property damage he'd caused to the hardwood floors and bathroom fixtures. Her security deposit was forfeit, and she faced additional charges that pushed her debt to nearly $4,000 beyond her ability to pay. The lifestyle she'd maintained during our relationship became completely unsustainable without the financial foundation I'd provided, and her attempt to replace that foundation through casual dating and unreliable roommates had backfired spectacularly. Facing eviction proceedings and unable to find another co-signer or afford market-rate housing on her yoga instructor income, Mia was forced to move back with her parents in a smaller Colorado town about 2 hours outside Denver. Her social media presence shifted from lifestyle posts about freedom and independence to vague inspirational quotes about new beginnings and learning life lessons. She took a job at a chain yoga studio that paid significantly less than her previous position, but was the only opportunity available in her parents' conservative community where yoga instruction wasn't in high demand. A year later, Zoe and I attended Leo's wedding at a mountain resort where we encountered Mia working as a server at the reception venue. She'd apparently taken a second job to supplement her reduced yoga income and was struggling to rebuild her credit and savings after the financial disaster that followed her pursuit of dating freedom. The encounter was brief but telling. She looked tired and spoke carefully about getting back on her feet, while clearly being uncomfortable about running into us during our obvious happiness and success. Seeing her serving drinks at an event where we were guests, celebrating our friend's marriage while planning our own future together, seemed to crystallize, for her, exactly what she'd thrown away when she decided that committed partnership was too restrictive. Zoe and I had just put an offer on a larger house with space for the motorcycle restoration workshop I'd always wanted, representing the kind of shared dreams and financial cooperation that build lasting relationships. The contrast between her current situation and what we were building together was impossible to ignore. When she approached our table later that evening, ostensibly to refill our water glasses, she mentioned quietly that she'd heard about our engagement and wanted us to know she was genuinely happy for us. Her tone carried none of the manipulation or drama from our previous interactions, just what seemed like honest recognition that we'd found something real together. She admitted that she'd never understood the difference between independence and isolation until she'd experienced both, and that she'd confused security with control in ways that cost her everything meaningful she'd once had. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it confirmed that her struggles had taught her lessons about partnership and commitment that our 18 months together never could. She discovered that casual dating didn't provide the foundation for building the kind of life she'd actually wanted, and that the stability she'd taken for granted with me required mutual investment and cooperation rather than one-sided support. Her pursuit of freedom to explore connections had left her more alone and limited than she'd ever been in our committed relationship. Driving home that night, I reflected that my response to her original demands hadn't been revenge or punishment, but simply honoring the exact relationship boundaries she'd established. I'd given her precisely what she'd asked for: the space to date other people without a boyfriend acting like a husband, the independence to handle her own problems without depending on a partner support, the freedom to pursue whatever opportunities came along without considering someone else's feelings or needs. Her learning experience had come from facing the natural consequences of those choices rather than from any vindictive actions on my part. The story illustrated something important about relationships and personal responsibility that I'd learned through both painful experience and eventual success. When someone treats partnership like a convenience rather than a commitment, responding with dignity and appropriate boundaries teaches more effective lessons than arguments or desperate attempts to change their mind. Mia's year of struggle had accomplished what no amount of discussion could have achieved, helping her understand that real security comes from mutual investment rather than one-sided dependence, and that genuine freedom requires the ability to support yourself independently rather than expecting others to subsidize your choices without reciprocal consideration.